History is full of people facing a small problem and responding with a war, a ban, a public execution, or a national panic. Today, we are counting down 32 of the biggest overreactions ever recorded, from deadly arguments over bad wine to governments declaring war on music, coffee, fashion, games, and even flowers. 1. Tulip mania began when the Dutch Republic looked at a perfectly innocent flower and decided it should behave like a luxury stock, a lottery ticket, and a retirement plan all at once. During the 1630s, contracts for rare tulip bulbs climbed to ridiculous prices and changed hands repeatedly, often before anyone had even seen the actual plant. The tulip had not evolved magical properties. It was still a bulb that eventually produced petals and then sat there doing absolutely nothing financially useful. But scarcity, fashion, and speculation transformed certain varieties into social trophies. Then buyers vanished, confidence collapsed, and the market remembered that flowers cannot pay debts. Later stories exaggerated how much of the country participated, but the core absurdity remains magnificent. People assigned enormous value to decorative onions because everyone else appeared willing to do the same. Economics briefly became gardening with gambling addiction. 2. During the 1980s, Dungeons & Dragons somehow evolved from a tabletop game for imaginative teenagers into an alleged recruitment program for Satan, suicide, and the collapse of Western civilization. Parents, television hosts, and preachers saw kids rolling dice beside bowls of chips and reacted as though the basement contained an active doorway to hell. A handful of tragic cases, sensational reporting, and the wider satanic panic created the idea that pretending to be a wizard could corrupt the soul. In reality, most sessions involved arithmetic, improvised storytelling, and 20-minute arguments about whether an imaginary door was locked. But demons printed in a rulebook were apparently all the evidence some people required. Civilization, they feared, stood one unlucky dice roll away from destruction. That is an elite overreaction to a hobby built from pencils, paper, snacks, and friends loudly misunderstanding the rules. 3. Oxford's St. Scholastica Day riot began with students complaining about bad wine, because medieval people apparently believed a disappointing drink required consequences slightly stronger than leaving a poor review. In 1355, an argument inside a tavern escalated between scholars and townspeople, then spread into several days of armed violence. Long-standing resentment between the university and the city had already packed the room with tension, so the wine dispute merely struck the match. Bells were rung, mobs gathered, weapons appeared, and dozens of people died. The original complaint had been that the wine tasted terrible. The response was urban warfare. Universities are supposed to encourage discussion, disagreement, and perhaps the occasional unbearable lecture. Oxford, instead, transformed customer feedback into a multi-day bloodbath. It remains one of history's clearest demonstrations that when resentment has been fermenting long enough, even bad alcohol can become a weapon of mass overreaction. 4. Pope Stephen VI disliked his dead predecessor Formosus so intensely that burial itself was not enough to end the argument. He ordered the corpse exhumed, dressed in papal clothing, placed on a throne, and formally tried during the nightmare now called the cadaver synod. A deacon spoke for Formosus, while accusations were addressed to a body that had already spent months underground and was contributing very little to its own defense. The dead pope was found guilty, his decisions were invalidated, and his remains were mistreated again. This was not justice operating under unusual circumstances. It was political revenge wearing church robes and demanding scenery. Most rivalries end when one participant dies. Stephen treated death as a minor scheduling inconvenience. Medieval papal politics already contained ambition, factional hatred, and betrayal. But prosecuting a corpse raised the entire spectacle into magnificent Gothic insanity. 5. Louis IX of France examined chess, a quiet game based on patience, planning, and tiny wooden pieces, and decided it belonged in a royal moral crackdown. During the 13th century, he prohibited the game along with gambling and other amusements he considered improper. Chess may have been condemned partly because people bet on matches, but it is still hilarious that a deeply religious king found time to declare hostility toward bishops moving diagonally across a board. Medieval Europe offered rulers invasions, rebellions, disease, and nobles constantly inventing new reasons to fight each other. Yet somewhere inside this hurricane of problems, carved horses required immediate attention. You can picture a confused courtier explaining that, "No, Your Majesty, the rook is not corrupting society. It only moves in straight lines." But moral panic has never needed proportionality. Once amusement becomes suspicious, even silent strategic thinking can look like civilization collapsing one pawn at a time. 6. Sultan Murad IV did not simply dislike tobacco, alcohol, or crowded coffee houses. He treated them as enemies of order deserving the sort of response normally reserved for rebellion. Smoking was banned, taverns and coffee houses were closed, and people accused of violating the rules could face execution. Suddenly, enjoying a pipe was no longer a questionable habit. It was a potentially terminal lifestyle decision. Coffee houses especially alarmed rulers because men gathered there to trade news, gossip, complain, and occasionally discuss the uncomfortable possibility that the government was not perfect. Murad's solution was not licensing, taxation, or a stern public notice. It was terror. That makes his campaign one of history's most extreme examples of authority seeing ordinary social habits and imagining political explosives hidden inside them. When anti-smoking policy moves directly from disapproval to death, the response scale has not merely broken. It has been dragged outside and publicly executed. 7. The Nika revolt showed what happens when sports rivalry, political anger, and a gigantic urban crowd all lose control at the same time. Constantinople's blues and greens were far more than chariot racing supporters. They were powerful social factions with political connections, street muscle, and years of accumulated hostility. In 532, anger over arrests, taxes, officials, and Emperor Justinian's government fused with the energy of the hippodrome. The result was not an especially rowdy match. Much of the capital burned, imperial authority nearly collapsed, and the emperor reportedly considered fleeing before the revolt was crushed with enormous bloodshed. This was ancient fandom, after someone added revolutionary politics and handed it a torch. The original chants came from racing factions, but the explosion swallowed an entire city. Imagine the most furious sports crowd you have ever seen, then give it political grievances, medieval weapons, and access to the capital. That was Nika. 8. In 1913, tango frightened respectable society so badly that parts of the Catholic establishment treated the dance like a coordinated attack on civilization. Church leaders condemned its intimate steps, dramatic movements, and suspicious ability to make adults enjoy themselves in public. Pope Pius X was widely associated with opposition to the dance, while religious authorities in Paris moved against tango instruction. Apparently, a close embrace and some stylish footwork were enough to place morality in immediate danger. Tango had arrived from Argentina carrying glamour, sensuality, and no visible interest in asking nervous elites for permission. Critics responded as though every turn across the dance floor loosened another brick from Christian society. Today, tango appears elegant, technical, and almost formal. Back then, it was social dynamite wearing polished shoes. Every generation believes the young are dancing incorrectly, but this one practically expected civilization to collapse because couples moved too confidently to music. 9. Early automobiles terrified Victorian Britain so thoroughly that lawmakers treated them less like transportation and more like mobile industrial predators. The Locomotives on Highways Act of 1865 imposed extremely low speed limits and required certain self-propelled vehicles to be preceded by a person carrying a red flag, not riding beside the machine, walking in front of it, warning everyone that the future was approaching at the thrilling speed of a mildly determined pedestrian. Concerns about noise, accidents, damaged roads, and frightened horses were reasonable. The solution was gloriously excessive. Engineers had created vehicles capable of moving without animals, and Parliament responded by attaching an honorary human horse to the front. Britain did not reject technological progress completely. It simply demanded that progress follow a man on foot. Nothing captures legislative overreaction better than inventing faster transport, and then legally forcing it to travel at roughly the pace of someone returning from lunch. 10. Clytus the Black had fought beside Alexander the Great and once saved his life in battle. Years later, during a drunken banquet in 328 before Christ, Alexander killed him during an argument. Alcohol, royal ego, personal resentment, and deeper tensions over Alexander's behavior turned an ugly exchange into irreversible murder. Clytus criticized the king, defended the achievements of the older Macedonian generation, and struck directly at Alexander's growing sense of grandeur. Alexander responded not as a ruler capable of hearing criticism, but as an intoxicated conqueror whose wounded pride had access to weapons. The horror is sharpened by Clytus's loyalty. This was not a stranger or a captured enemy. It was a senior commander who had protected Alexander when his own life was at risk. A man capable of conquering enormous territories could not conquer his temper at dinner. That is not tragic greatness. That is world-changing power combined with catastrophically poor emotional control. 11. The War of Jenkins Ear received its wonderfully ridiculous name from a genuine and gruesome incident. British Captain Robert Jenkins claimed Spanish coastguards had cut off his ear during a search, and the story later became a powerful symbol of Spanish cruelty and national humiliation. According to the famous account, the preserved ear was even displayed before Parliament. But Britain and Spain did not truly go to war because politicians became emotionally attached to one detached body part. Trade restrictions, smuggling, colonial competition, and imperial rivalry had been building for years. The ear simply gave public anger a memorable mascot. That is what makes the episode such an excellent historical overreaction. A brutal encounter was transformed into propaganda, powerful enough to help sell a much larger conflict. Complicated economic tensions are difficult to shout about. A severed ear is extremely easy. Imperial politics found the perfect prop, and subtlety immediately packed its belongings. 12. Medieval football was less a sport than a socially approved excuse for an entire town to chase one object while colliding with buildings, strangers, and basic public order. Matches could flood streets with huge crowds, violence, noise, and almost no recognizable rules. So when London authorities banned the game in 1314, they were responding to genuine chaos. But English rulers kept treating football like a contagious civic disease. It was repeatedly condemned not only because people were injured and property suffered, but because the game distracted men from archery practice. Archery helped win wars. Football merely allowed everyone to kick, punch, shout, and occasionally disappear beneath a moving pile of neighbors. Medieval government therefore issued the wonderfully practical message: stop enjoying this disorderly ballgame and return to preparing for military service. Before football became a global industry, it was leather-powered street anarchy, and authority reacted as though hostile forces had invaded wearing muddy boots. 13. Genghis Khan sent merchants into the Khwarezmian Empire expecting trade. The governor of Otrar accused them of spying, seized the caravan, and had its members killed. Genghis then sent envoys demanding justice, only for the Khwarezm Shah to insult him further and mistreat the diplomats. This was an astonishing diplomatic miscalculation, roughly equivalent to poking a volcano and criticizing its manners. The original crime was serious. Protected merchants and envoys had been murdered. But Genghis responded with a campaign of such overwhelming destruction that the Khwarezmian state was shattered, cities were devastated, and the region was transformed. Revenge did not merely arrive. It arrived with armies, siege engines, and a plan to remove the offending empire from the geopolitical map. The Shah's arrogance helped create the disaster, but the scale of retaliation remains breathtaking. An insult to Mongol authority became a civilization-sized demolition project written across Central Asia in smoke. 14. As the year 2000 approached, humanity became convinced that 2 missing digits might bring down banking, aviation, electricity, communications, and possibly every office printer on Earth. The technical concern was real. Many computer systems stored years using only 2 digits, meaning 00 could be misread as 1900 rather than 2000. Programmers, governments, and companies spent enormous amounts of money correcting vulnerable systems. Then, public imagination took the issue, fed it pure panic, and transformed it into digital doomsday. People stored food, withdrew cash, purchased generators, and prepared for society to collapse at midnight because old software might become confused by a calendar. When the date changed, major disasters largely failed to appear, partly because years of preparation had worked. The lights stayed on, aircraft remained airborne, and civilization discovered it had survived an apocalypse heavily advertised by nervous television specials and emergency canned beans. 15. The Auspicious Incident sounds like a royal wedding, or the arrival of an unusually attractive comet. In reality, it was Sultan Mahmud II's violent destruction of the Janissaries in 1826. The corps had once been an elite Ottoman military force, but over centuries it became politically powerful, resistant to reform, and deeply involved in removing rulers it disliked. When the Janissaries rebelled against Mahmud's new military plans, he did not offer a compromise or gently reorganize the institution. Troops surrounded their barracks, artillery opened fire, and the corps was crushed through bombardment, executions, arrests, and systematic suppression. A military organization that had existed for centuries was deleted in a matter of days. Mahmud solved the reform problem in the way an avalanche solves inconvenient architecture. The Janissaries were unquestionably dangerous to his plans, but calling their annihilation auspicious remains one of history's finest achievements in cheerful government branding. 16. In 1139, the Second Lateran Council attempted to prohibit the use of bows and crossbows against Christians, presenting these weapons as especially hateful. The Church was not announcing that warfare itself had suddenly become immoral. That would have required far too much consistency. The outrage focused on technology that allowed comparatively ordinary soldiers to kill armored nobles from a distance. A trained crossbowman did not need noble birth, a war horse, or years of aristocratic combat education to become extremely inconvenient. The weapon disrupted the social hierarchy of the battlefield, and moral alarm followed with remarkable speed. Apparently, violence remained acceptable as long as it respected the correct class structure. Once a mechanical device allowed the wrong people to threaten the right people, heaven was officially concerned. Medieval authorities looked at increasingly efficient warfare and decided the scandal was not mass killing. The scandal was that killing had become dangerously accessible. 17. The Puritans studied Christmas and somehow concluded that the holiday itself needed to be stopped. They objected to its Catholic associations, lack of clear biblical authorization, drunken celebrations, gambling, feasting, public disorder, and the intolerable sight of people enjoying December too enthusiastically. In England, Christmas observances were suppressed during Puritan rule. In Massachusetts, celebrating the holiday could earn a fine. Instead of targeting specific excesses, authorities treated the entire occasion like a seasonal outbreak of theological contamination. Decorations, games, special meals, and festive gatherings became suspicious evidence that joy had escaped supervision. There is something almost impressive about seeing rowdy holiday behavior and deciding the cleanest solution is to attack Christmas itself. Many governments have tried to regulate public morality, but the Puritans reached championship level. They saw celebration, detected possible fun, and responded with legislation. Even the calendar was apparently one uncontrolled feast away from spiritual collapse. 18. In 1904, Russia's Baltic fleet sailed toward war with Japan, while gripped by rumors, nerves, and the belief that Japanese torpedo boats might be hiding almost anywhere. This paranoia became catastrophic near Dogger Bank, when Russian ships mistook British fishing vessels for enemy attackers and opened fire in the North Sea. The Japanese Navy was thousands of miles away, but fear had apparently granted it teleportation. Russian crews fired wildly, struck the trawlers, and even managed to hit friendly vessels during the confusion. 2 British fishermen were killed, others were wounded, and Britain came dangerously close to entering the war against Russia. The fleet had a genuine reason to fear attack eventually. It simply reacted to that fear by seeing invisible Japanese warships among harmless fishing boats. This was less naval vigilance than armed panic wandering across the ocean with terrible aim and enough firepower to create an international crisis. 19. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, American fear expanded far beyond reasonable military precautions and became the forced removal and incarceration of Japanese Americans. More than 100,000 people were uprooted from their homes, many of them citizens of the United States, without individual evidence proving they posed the threat officials claimed. Families lost businesses, property, education, privacy, and years of normal life because ancestry itself was treated as suspicious. The government framed the policy as wartime necessity, but racism, political pressure, and collective paranoia did much of the actual work. There is no joke aimed at the victims here. The absurdity belongs entirely to a state that answered an enemy attack by punishing civilians who had committed no crime. Fear can make cruelty sound administrative, especially when official language hides the human cost. This was not careful security. It was prejudice receiving uniforms, fences, forms, and federal approval. 20. In 1956, officials in Santa Cruz watched teenagers dancing to rock and roll and concluded that public morality was suffering a rhythm-related emergency. The city announced that rock and roll would not be permitted at public gatherings because the music and dancing were supposedly harmful to young people and the health of the community. That description makes guitar music sound like contaminated drinking water. Adults were scandalized by dancing they considered suggestive, proving once again that every generation eventually sees younger people moving their hips and assumes civilization has entered its final hours. Rock and roll was not treated as loud entertainment or a passing youth trend. It became a civic toxin requiring official resistance. Authorities essentially launched municipal warfare against teenagers having fun too energetically. History contains revolutions, epidemics, and economic disasters, yet few things have frightened respectable officials as reliably as young people discovering a new beat without first requesting written permission. 21. Ivan the Terrible's life contains enough violent rage to fill several lists, but the traditional account of his son's death remains the most personally disastrous. During an argument in 1581, Ivan supposedly struck his heir, Ivan Ivanovich, with his staff and inflicted a fatal wound. Historians continue to debate details of the episode, but the famous version survived because it perfectly captures the Tsar's terrifying reputation. Even by the standards of brutal monarchy, killing your own successor during a burst of anger is spectacularly self-destructive. This was not distant repression ordered from a throne. It was a family dispute, royal authority, and uncontrolled fury collapsing inside one room. The consequence was not only grief, but serious dynastic damage. Ivan had spent years attacking enemies, real and imagined. Then his violence allegedly turned inward and helped destroy the future of his own house. Few tempers have produced a worse succession plan. 22. Philip IV of France saw the Knights Templar and identified everything a financially desperate monarch dislikes: wealth, independence, international influence, and an organization that did not fit comfortably beneath royal control. In 1307, Templars across France were arrested in a coordinated operation, tortured into confessions, and accused of heresy, idolatry, and secret rituals. Many charges were deeply questionable, but torture has a remarkable ability to produce whichever answers authorities ordered in advance. Philip pressured the papacy, seized assets, and pursued the order until it was dissolved. This was not merely suspicion getting slightly out of hand. It was institutional destruction wrapped in legal documents and religious language. The king owed the Templars money, coveted their resources, and disliked their autonomy. Conveniently, they all became dangerous heretics at exactly the moment their existence became politically inconvenient. Medieval power rarely announced greed honestly when accusations of blasphemy were available. 23. Andrew Jackson possessed many political talents, but calmly ignoring an insult was not among them. His feud with Charles Dickinson began around a horse racing dispute and became poisonous when Dickinson publicly attacked Rachel Jackson's reputation. Jackson responded by arranging a duel, because apparently rude words required formal gunfire. Dickinson was considered the superior marksman and shot Jackson in the chest. Jackson remained standing, carefully aimed, and killed him with his return shot. He then carried the bullet near his heart for the rest of his life. The entire episode captures Jackson's personality before the presidency. Intensely proud, fiercely loyal, easily enraged, and disturbingly willing to turn personal conflict into mortal combat. A disagreement about horses and honor ended with one man dead and another permanently wounded. Most people survive bad publicity by refusing to read it. Jackson preferred a method involving loaded pistols and an extremely flexible understanding of conflict resolution. 24. The War of the Bucket sounds like history invented it after several drinks. But the bucket really did become the absurd symbol of a serious conflict between Modena and Bologna. The fighting grew from the larger struggle between Guelph and Ghibelline factions, territorial rivalry, and competition between neighboring Italian city-states. It was not literally caused by someone stealing household equipment. According to the famous story, Modenese soldiers took a wooden bucket from Bologna and displayed it as a trophy. That detail proved far more memorable than the complicated politics, because human beings will always choose a ridiculous object over a careful geopolitical explanation. The bucket became the celebrity of the war, starring in legends long after the original military issues faded. So Bologna and Modena did not truly unleash armies over plumbing supplies. History merely compressed their hatred into the wonderfully efficient sentence, "They stole our bucket, and now people must die." 25. Emperor Caracalla did not stop after arranging the murder of his brother and co-ruler Geta. He wanted Geta removed from public memory so completely that the Roman state itself was ordered to participate. Geta's name was erased from inscriptions, his portraits were damaged, references were removed, and supporters were persecuted. This was damnatio memoriae, an official condemnation intended to make a disgraced figure disappear from Rome's visible story. Caracalla was not satisfied with winning the imperial power struggle. He wanted reality edited afterward so nobody could forget Geta incorrectly by remembering him at all. It was the ancient equivalent of deleting someone from every photograph, document, monument, and family account because murder had somehow failed to feel final enough. Naturally, the effort helped preserve Geta's story. Attempted erasure leaves obvious scars. Caracalla attacked his brother's life, reputation, image, and memory, transforming sibling rivalry into an empire-wide campaign against historical evidence. 26. The Kettle War was born from a genuine dispute, and then remembered for the most humiliating detail imaginable. Emperor Joseph II wanted the Dutch Republic to reopen the Scheldt River, so Antwerp and the Austrian Netherlands could trade more freely. The Dutch refused, tensions rose, and in 1784 an Austrian vessel attempted to challenge the closure. Dutch forces fired one shot. According to the famous story, it struck a kettle aboard the ship, which surrendered soon afterward. That was essentially the military highlight. Great powers had gathered arguments about sovereignty, commerce, treaties, and imperial prestige, only for history to summarize the confrontation as cookware taking damage. The disagreement was serious, but the war became a state-level tantrum whose most notable casualty may have been someone's lunch equipment. Diplomats can dress wounded pride in elegant language, yet sometimes the universe responds by placing a soup kettle directly in the path of the only cannonball. 27. When Halley's Comet approached Earth in 1910, astronomers reported cyanogen gas in its tail. The public heard this and immediately upgraded a beautiful celestial event into possible planetary fumigation. Newspapers amplified the fear. Merchants sold supposed comet pills and protective products, and some people prepared for the end of the world. Others held parties because apparently the correct response to toxic space vapor is music and refreshments. Earth was expected to pass through part of the comet's tail, but this did not mean the atmosphere would become a cosmic gas chamber. The quantity and conditions posed no apocalyptic threat. Still, once the phrase poison gas in the comet, reached popular imagination, scientific proportion was finished. Astronomy met marketing, anxiety, and human enthusiasm for doom. The result was a brief commercial boom in products designed to protect customers from a comet that had no intention of poisoning anyone. 28. The football war between El Salvador and Honduras was not truly fought because of football, but the World Cup qualifying matches of 1969 became an emotional detonator. The countries were already divided by migration disputes, land pressure, economic inequality, nationalism, and hostility towards Salvadorans living in Honduras. Then came the matches, hostile crowds, hotel harassment, riots, inflammatory newspapers, and governments using sport to intensify public anger. Football did not create the gasoline. It supplied the match and a stadium full of people eager to watch it burn. Soon, diplomatic relations collapsed, El Salvador invaded, and a short but deadly war followed. The name survives because it captures the absurd surface of a much darker crisis. Two nations did not simply lose their minds over a score. They allowed matches to transform existing grievances into national hysteria. Sport became political fuel at exactly the moment both governments should have removed the matches. 29. During the 19th century, tuberculosis devastated New England families, while medical knowledge remained poorly understood outside professional circles. Some communities reached for an explanation far stranger than infectious disease. The dead were returning as vampires and draining the lives of surviving relatives. Families sometimes exhumed bodies, inspected organs for supposed signs of unnatural preservation, and burned hearts or livers in desperate attempts to stop the illness. The Mercy Brown case became the most famous example. The victims were not foolish people enjoying superstition for entertainment. They were terrified families watching one person after another become pale, weak, and dead without understanding why. Grief filled the gap where medicine failed. Unfortunately, it filled that gap with undead relatives and horrifying rituals. The suffering was real, the explanation was wrong, and fear turned mourning into something resembling Gothic theater. Tuberculosis needed doctors. Panic brought shovels, fire, and a deeply unfortunate family reunion. 30. In 1675, Charles II decided England's coffee houses were not merely noisy rooms filled with caffeine, gossip, merchants, and political complaints. They were threats to royal authority. His proclamation accused coffee houses of attracting idle and disaffected people who spread scandalous reports about the government. In modern language, too many citizens were gathering in public and reviewing the monarchy without permission. Charles attempted to suppress the establishments, but the reaction was immediate and furious. Coffee sellers protested, customers objected, and the government retreated before the closure could properly take effect. The king had tried to defeat coffee, conversation, commerce, and public opinion in one majestic swing, then discovered that caffeinated people are unusually motivated when someone threatens their meeting place. The crackdown barely survived long enough to become embarrassing. Charles feared that coffee houses encouraged political unrest. By attacking them, he mainly proved their complaints about government interference spectacularly correct. Now settle this properly. Which overreaction was the most unhinged, and which historical meltdown did we criminally leave off the list? Name it in the comments and make your case, because weak nominations will be judged accordingly. Like the video if history's tantrums entertained you, and subscribe for more disasters created by people who had power, pride, and absolutely no chill.